Hi there, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Cloud-Based Mayhem. No housekeeping today. We can get right into this show with Alex Schweig. He is Peruvian born and got into flying down there at Miraflores, and then shortly afterwards got a little bored with that and decided to pick it up a bit. Got into acro, still into acro, learned German so he could move to the Austrian Alps and get a job and work in flying, and picked Görlitzen, a very famous acro spot, and a really good place to train, a really good place to send it, and he's doing all of those things. So he reached out to me with a terrific email about how he approaches safety and risk and progression and the value of proximity flying and ground handling and all the things that we hear about on the show, but really enjoyed his perspective from the email and what he was talking about. So reached out and did a show with him. He's been flying for 12 years, has big ambitions. Just recently did his first comps down in Colombia at the Colombia Open and the British Open, and has been doing a lot of flying with Yasin Savoy, a legend, comp pilot, and I just really enjoyed this. We spent an hour together talking what we all love. So please enjoy this great talk with a fascinating individual, Alex Schweig. Alex, welcome to the Mayhem. I'm glad you reached out to me, and kind of funny timing. I was just looking at, there's a few people I like to follow on Instagram and just saw one of your nice photos, I think, of flying with Yasin this winter down in Colombia. I understand you just spent quite a bit of time down there, but I thought where we might start, because maybe a lot of our listeners aren't familiar with you. I wasn't, and I had to kind of, since you sent me that email, I had to been following you a bit on the social media stuff. But why don't you share with everybody your brief history and why we're going to chat today?
Thanks, Kevin. As an avid listener of the podcast, it's quite a pleasure to be here. I'm not yet a household name in paragliding. Hope to be someday. Basically, I was born in Peru. Means I grew up soaring on the coast in Lima. It's a popular coastal soaring site, but boating around gets boring pretty quickly. So that took me into the pursuit of acro flying and ground handling and proximity flying and this Waga kind of flying style. And that ended up bringing me to Europe in 2018 for a big Euro tour. Long story short, I found an opportunity in Austria, learned German within a year, and the next year I was basically living in Austria and working as a tandem pilot, something I had already been doing in Lima as well on the side, but here it took upon a more professional note and kind of expanded my network of contacts and my interest in paragliding, to the point that this year I went on a cross-country exploration trip with an ex-colleague of mine, Yasin Savov. He's a well-known PwC pilot, and that opens the door to this next chapter in my adventure flying, which is the world of cross-country, which I find very, very intensely interesting.
And you've got a German accent. Is that just from picking it up and being over in Austria, or have you spent a lot of time in Europe previously? And also, you don't look Peruvian. So what's your background? What's your heritage?
That's funny you say that. I tend to pick up accents pretty quickly. It's since I started living in Austria, I've picked up a pretty backcountry, mountainous Austrian dialect as well in German, which is a bit of a fun note. My family is mostly European in background, but I was born in Peru. My mother was born in Peru as well. But I'm here on a Belgian passport, thanks to the fact that my dad was born in Belgium. So it made things quite a bit easier.
Did you learn in Peru? Did you learn in Lima and the sites we've all seen in front of the buildings, kind of the ridge soaring site?
Yeah, exactly. So basically, this site that everybody knows, the one in front of the big buildings on the coast, is called Miraflores. Mm-hmm. I didn't learn exactly there. I learned further down the coast at the site where the people who got kicked out of the main site went to fly. Because I was 15 years old, I never actually took a course to learn how to paraglide. It was basically borrowing equipment and playing with it, and about 6 months of ground handling before I ever got my feet off the ground. And to this I credit this love for ground handling has made me a much better and much more intuitive pilot, I would say.
Do you think all that playing around on the deck led you to acro too? Because that's, we see all the acro pilots are just so, that's something we hammer on the show all the time is how important ground handling is, and just how fun it can be too. We want to encourage XC pilots to spend a lot of time doing it. But do you think that's what led you to acro, or is it more the flying and just kind of getting bored with the ridge soaring?
I'm going to get on the side of the XC pilots who don't like ground handling and say, okay, it can be really frustrating at the beginning. But once you get into a certain flow, it can be extremely rewarding. And of course, at some point, this playful, either proximity very close to the ground or handling the glider from one side to another, spinning it, jumping around. This kind of playfulness, of course, can turn into the same kind of emotions in the air. And as soon as ridge soaring from one side to the other becomes boring, you start looking to get upside down.
How did you kind of start breaking into acro? Where did that how did you is there are there good places for that in Peru, or
So not really on the coast. It's a coastal soaring site. The one good thing is if the wind comes in early during the day, it mostly holds during the whole day, and it means you can do many, so to say, runs. But the truth is you're flying at most, at best, 200 meters over the ocean with waves, with power lines underneath you, a highway on the coast, and buildings behind you. So there's no possibility of actually throwing a rescue. It's not a good acro spot, but it did allow me to get an insane amount of airtime in the few years that I was flying there.
I imagine when you're ridge soaring like that, and it, like you said, it does get a little dry after not too much time, so you start spending a lot more time getting close to things, proximity flying, and scraping your feet, and just making it more fun, which is also obviously, anytime we're playing with the ground, it's a little bit more dangerous, but it's also really good training. Did you find that also kind of helped you prepare for acro?
Yeah, definitely. One of the sites we started flying at once I got bored at Miraflores is Paracas. It's a coastal soaring site about 3 hours away from Lima. This I can recommend to everybody. It's a beautiful, beautiful place in the desert inside a natural reserve. And the whole fun there is you can fly barefoot, you can touch down on objects, you can fly very close to the ground, and this sensitivity and this playfulness for sure will reflect in many other aspects of flying because you're making corrections all the time. You're always in constant movement. You don't stop adjusting the angle of attack, the turn, the pitch of the glider, including weight shift as well. And I really do believe that this intensity of play has a positive effect on all aspects of flying.
Did you compete in acro?
No, my level in acro is pretty intermediate. I took part in the last Acro World Cup in Albania last year. But my interest right now is not really competing at a high level in acro. The level that pilots have reached right now is pretty crazy.
Yeah, it's insane.
I'm content being an intermediate pilot.
Yeah. How did you switch, or have you switched, I guess? When did the XC start?
Yeah, for me in Peru, XC was never really a thing. I kind of observed it as from the side because there are cross-country pilots and there are cross-country possibilities, but Peru is a complicated place to fly. The Andes are very aggressive in geography as well as in climate, and that never really piqued my interest. Once I came to Europe, I realized that there was so much potential to learn cross-country, but anyways, I was way too concentrated with the whole history of my acro flying here in Europe. And I worked together with Yassen as a tandem pilot at Gerlitsen. It's a popular acro site. And at some point during one of the summers that we worked together, he told me, get a cross-country glider, get a competition glider. You have the skills to control it. At which point I said, no, I don't. But he told me to get a cross-country glider, prepare mentally, and go down with him to Colombia to do some exploration flying. And this was the beginning of what I hope will be a pretty long and savory career in cross-country flying.
I like the last sentence in your email when you were kind of introducing yourself to me was laugh a bit at our shameless pursuit of living from piloting flying bags around the sky with grace and tact. It's a great
Yeah,
sentence.
it's
Flying bags. I love that. Around the sky with grace and tact. What does grace and tact mean to you?
for me, it's pretty important to have a distinctive style. I think one of the things that we can radiate around in our pursuit of flying is not only our emotions but our style in the air as well as on the ground. And it's important for me to show who I am in the air, not only so people can recognize who I am, but for me to always look for a certain harmony and a certain grace in my flying. In the same way that the mark of a top chef can be recognized instantly by the way they play with flavors, I would really love for the mark of my flying to be seen instantly in the air.
I've never heard an analogy with food with flying. We hear about the chessboard in the sky and flying chess all the time, but
Hmm.
I'm also a foodie. I'm not a chef at your level by any means, but the cuisine in Peru is, world famous these days, especially in Lima. And that's an interesting analogy to tie food to, style, the style of food and the complexities of flavor to flying. I like that. That's interesting.
Yeah, I think there's a certain analogy to be made between the activities that one pursues in life, be it rock climbing or skiing or cooking or music or flying. I think everybody can put their own spin on things, and I think it's pretty important to refine this distinctiveness. Not in the sense that you have to be a show off about it, or people have to recognize it instantly, but it gives you a very beautiful goal to work for in ever refining your own style and your own image, also of yourself. Because for me, motivation is a big thing. I've been flying for almost 12 years by now, and it is a complicated thing to take care of my motivation, to make sure that I don't lose the motivation for flying, to make sure that flying is always a pleasurable thing and a thing that I can always learn from, and not that flying becomes a routine, because that's the point where I guess it can become pretty dangerous when it's just a routine and it becomes careless and you don't care anymore about showing your style or refining your style or working on your technique or learning. When it becomes a careless pursuit on the side, I guess that's when it can also become pretty dangerous.
That's one of the chapters in my book, Killing Complacency, and it's because complacency kills. It's yeah, that's good that you bring that up. Will Gadd talks. I did that expedition with him a bunch of years ago across the Rockies, and for him, style is really important. How is style? You've mentioned style now a couple times. How do you think of style?
Yeah, for me, it's the distinctive mark that a pilot leaves in his flying that can be recognized in acrobatics. It's pretty easy to notice. You've got pilots that have a very aggressive style, or you have pilots that have a very technical, clean style. In cross country, that's more, well, not always more of a subtlety. There's some pilots who have a very sendy style, so to say. They will go out in front of the pack and not really care about anybody else's line choice and just do their own thing.
Yeah, like Yasin.
Um, yeah,
you're
like
lear- you're
Yasin, to
learning from the
mention to
king of
mention one.
that.
It's been fun to learn with him. He's
I
a
bet.
character. He's a very good friend, but he does have a very distinctive style in the sense that he will push forward with his own line choice without much regard to whatever the pack wants to do. And so, in a sense, that's a very distinctive style. Other people will be mathematical and calculating and very much the contemplative chess player about it. It really depends. For me, it's working towards an aesthetic that I can be completely happy with and that identifies me as a person in the air and on the ground.
You've said that you learned German so you could really bring your passion to a place where you can get the hours. Gerlitzen's one of the best in the world because you've got the acro site and amazing cross country and typically pretty good weather for cross country. It's an area I know very well. It's very special in the Alps, as are most of the Alps for flying. When you say work, is that tandem work? Are you working in paragliding, or is that with chef? Is that being a chef?
No, cooking was something I left on the side at about basically about 2015. I took the decision to leave cooking on the side for a while and dedicate on a career in paragliding. So to say, the easiest way to start with this was tandem flying. Working at a flying school doesn't really pay that well. Tandem flying is a good opportunity to have a very intense season and then take most of the year off to dedicate to my own flying. And the opportunities I found in Austria for tandem flying were very good. And not only that, the opportunities that I found to relate to a community. Gallatin is maybe not the best ever acro place. I would say it's Organya in any case, but the community that gathers at Gallatin is very unique. I think it's a completely unique community. There's only one like it in the world, and it's right there. It centers around this camping site called Camp Candy, by those who know it. And it's just such a colorful and flavorful mix of people from all over the world who come either to fly acro or do safety trainings or just dedicate the time to being happy and colorful.
You're 12 years now and pretty diverse. Sounds like you did you learned in Miraflores and did the ridge soaring and then acro and now you're in one of the mega places for it's kind of an Annecy of the Alps kind of place to train and fly. You mentioned motivation. Have you had times where it's been harder to motivate, harder to get out the door and get the hours?
For sure. There's been a few moments in my flying career where I've almost dropped out of the sport entirely because I pushed myself too hard. I have a low tolerance for frustration. That's something that one should recognize and handle carefully. So for sure, there's been moments where I was angry at flying, where I was angry at the fact that we spend so much time just waiting for the correct conditions. I was angry at the fact that acrobatic flying is very much a pursuit of repetition and repetition and repetition, and sometimes making the same mistakes over and over and over again, and mixing that with risk makes it even more complicated to manage. But one of the important things for me is just to keep things fresh, to mix with other outdoor sports. Right now, one of my biggest pursuits at the moment is skiing and ski touring, and that's something I can very easily mix with high mountain flying. For example, doing a long ski tour and flying down, or actually flying up to then ride down.
Yeah, that makes it fun, isn't it? When you're mixing activities, it's just a little bit of spark.
And I see many, of course, I see many young people around me who are pursuing the sport very intensely, and they attain an incredible level of skill in a very short time. Sometimes that makes me a bit envious because I look back at how long I've been flying, and sometimes I can't do all the tricks that some of the younger guys are doing. But then I realize that for me, the pursuit of free flight is much more of a long lasting thing. I want to do this for the next, I don't want to say a number of years. And in that sense, I have all the time in the world to diversify and pursue different directions in flying as long as it keeps me safe, happy, and motivated.
How old are you, Alex?
I'm 27 at the moment.
Okay. Still pretty young. 12 years. Just trying to do the math here. So you learned early. You were 15, 16 years old.
I had my first flights alone when I was 15. It's a bit of a funny story since I guess this story has been repeated over and over again in the history of paragliding, but I was ground handling on somebody's used equipment. I was already keen to get off the ground. Somebody gave me a radio, switched it on, took off. As soon as I took off, the battery died, boated around for about half an hour, top landed on my own. And then I decided I was a pilot. And a couple years later, I actually got a license of my own.
Have you had any accidents?
That's a good question. I've kept myself very, very much out of risk. I mean, not to say out of risk. I've kept myself out of unexpected encounters with the planet. Let's put it that way.
That's a good way to put it. You haven't hit the ground hard. You just hit it normally.
Oh no, I've hit the ground hard enough to bounce, but not enough to cause any long-lasting damage. It is very much in my interest to keep it that way.
Chalk that up for me. How I have often said I didn't get into this sport till I was 30, mid 30s, and I've often thought, given my background and my love of speed and ski racing and just all the stuff I did when I was young, I just don't know that I would have survived this sport if I had done it like you did it, at that age. Anyway, I've always thought it's pretty good. I think I'm happy that in some ways I'm bummed. And I mean, we learn better when we're younger. And, I would have loved to have been doing the X Alps 20 years ago instead of when I started at 42. Pretty much definitely past your physical peak kind of thing. So, but on the flip side, I've just thought, God, if I would have done this when I was 15, 16, I would have killed myself. I just didn't have the respect for, I don't know, death that I do now and risk. And, I was pretty loose for a long time and went back in my ski racing years. So I'm wondering how, we want young people to get into this sport. You got into it young. What do you think the difference is, or what are some of the things? What can you tell people that are listening to this who are maybe younger as a bit of a heads up? I'm not looking for
I
anything
would
that's,
say
hey, be careful, or go slow, but you're very different when you're 15 than when you are when you're 35.
100%. One thing that probably made a big difference for me was that I wasn't involved in any sports at all. I was not interested in sports until well after I started paragliding.
Okay.
So paragliding was an activity for me. Otherwise, I was quite a stay-at-home kid. And this made me much more reflective, I would say. It made me punish myself a bit harder for my mistakes and really try to punish myself every time I would put myself in danger. I would very much reflect upon it because I hadn't been exposed to this kind of danger before in my life. And with paragliding came also the pursuit of other sports and also some injuries on the side. For example, I got really into mountain biking, got really into downhill mountain biking, and then the injuries started coming. And I eventually left the sport because I thought this was unsustainable for me. And so one thing I would recommend probably younger pilots is to really think about how long they want to pursue a sport and not burn out in the first few years. I've seen way too many amazing talents get to a very high level and then just disappear. I guess it's a good idea to have in your head how long you want to do a sport for, what your goals might be in the sport, what are you willing to risk, how much you're willing to put on the table to attain a certain level of proficiency in a sport. If anything, just to reflect more upon the things that we do, to reflect more upon the times that we put ourselves in moments of unnecessary risk, and to have an open mind for other people's comments. We all know that there's a breed of pilots that only sit on the takeoff and tell everybody how dangerous conditions are, and then actually never fly, even when the conditions are a perfect bluebird day. But it's fine to listen to them, but it's also fine to develop a criteria to digest what kind of information is actually useful to you. So I guess having an open mind, listening to people who are more experienced, but not necessarily eating up everything that everybody tells you as well.
Yeah, that's another chapter in the book. It's a hard thing sometimes, I think, for veteran pilots. It's pretty easy to decipher which is which, but I imagine that's hard. I don't really remember that. I flew more in places when I was, coming into the sport where there weren't many people around. So I didn't have to deal with that too much, but I imagine it's hard to figure that out when you're a 100-hour pilot. Who are the guys that are, constantly ground sucking and for not much reason versus the people that you really should be listening to. That might be Kriegel on launch talking about challenging conditions. You probably want to listen to that.
Yeah, exactly. If somebody is throwing feedback at you, I think it's pretty important to have an open eye and see who is actually on the other side of the mic. In my early days, my motivation was thrown down quite a bit. My pursuit of acro and my pursuit of acro at a high level was thrown down quite a bit by the fact that nobody was flying acro at the coast. Everybody saw it as something intensely dangerous. And I was shunned away from actually pursuing this so intensely because it was perceived as something that would cause a public accident, get our flying site closed down. And in the end, moving to Europe and finding such a mass of like-minded people and such a mass of young people who would embrace this kind of activity and say that's perfectly fine what you do. We're actually way more sendy than you are. You're actually a conservative one compared to all the variety of crazy birds out there. That was a big eye opener for me.
Mm. Yeah, I think this is one of the most important things. If you want to get good, you got to live in a good place to fly, isn't it? I think that's just so critical, often overlooked. You need to be in a place that you can get the hours, and you need to be in a place where there's a lot better pilots than you are.
100%. I think one of the most important things is just to surround yourself with pilots who are way, way better than you are. That's for once you learn through osmosis, you get to see a reference point and locate yourself somewhere on the proficiency scale and figure out what your path is to getting to a level similar to theirs. At the moment, I don't have a fixed home. At the moment, I just move around wherever I get the most flying hours. And in this way, it's a nice challenge as well to organize one's life around flying conditions.
Mm. You recently started flying comps. I think in 2020 you did your first down in Colombia, if I have that right. I'd love to hear what you're learning from guys like Yasin and how that progression is going and kind of what your goals are with that in the future.
Yeah, actually, my first two high-level comps were this year, so 2021. I did the Colombian Open and then got accepted as a wild card at the British Open down in Roldanillo. This was an eye-opener.
So that was just this year. So you've just done your first.
That was just this year.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, and I have the New York Open coming up in May, and from there on, I still have to figure out the rest of my calendar. Mm-hmm. It was pretty much an eye-opener to see the level of pilots flying competitions, the speed at which they calculate their proficiency in handling their gliders, how good they are at climbing is a real eye-opener. I would say that's the biggest difference between being proficient at acro flying and keeping a glider open will not teach you how to climb fast. That's a skill completely of its own.
The British Open, I didn't compete in the British this year, but I have in past years. It's pretty World Cup speed. This year I watched it from afar. It's fast. How did you find, was it encouraging or was it really, really humbling? Or both?
Oh, I loved it. I loved it. Many were saying the speed of this year's British Open was similar to PwC, which makes sense because most of the PwC pilots this year were using it as the warm-up.
Yeah.
It was a bit of an eye-opener for me to realize how much I still have to go before I get anywhere near being a top-level pilot. But it also gave me a good sense of the fact that I am already in a good position to start with. I can push confidently on a two-liner. Actually, this time that I spent down in Colombia, so about 60-something hours flying two-liners and 1,500 kilometers flying down in Colombia, was the first time I'd ever spent any time at all on two-liners. So I arrived in Colombia, and 2 days later, with 3 hours of sleep, I was flying 70K behind Yasin on a zeolite.
Fun. That's a good time.
Yeah, it's quite the experience, I would say. And then following Yasin's pace through the backcountry of Colombia, doing some exploration flying, that was interesting to say the least. And as for the competitions, I would say that the one thing that makes a huge difference is the climbing. Because gliding, finding good lines when you're gaggle flying is possible, is not that difficult, but being the one who arrives, even if you arrive low at a thermal, and being the one who reaches cloud base first or reaches the altitude at which you want to drop that thermal and go full bar again first is an art in and of itself.
What little things were you picking up following Yasin around? He's a good climber. He tends to just, his downfall is impatience, but it's something we all just love about him. He's always out leading. It's fantastic to watch. The Russ, who won the world championships this year, always talks about discipline. So Yasin probably wouldn't, I don't think he would say he has a lot of discipline, but he loves pushing. But I'm curious, being able to fly with him outside of the comp environment, what you've learned from following him around in the sky.
I wouldn't call it impatience. I would call it pickiness. if a thermal is not right, if it doesn't have the right punch to it, he's just going to completely ignore it. While somebody who's just learning and somebody more conservative like me is probably going to scratch around in a plus 0.2 and think, okay, I'm getting height, this is perfect, and not actually go and transition again to find that boomer waiting for you 2 kilometers away.
Yeah. Just learning when to smoke through something, maybe sometimes a little bit slower, but just backing off a little bit if you get a bubble versus turning is one of the critical aspects of doing well in comps, because when it starts getting really fast at the World Cup level, one turn that's not well used is we don't want to go backwards. You'll just never catch the lead gaggle again. So that becomes a really critical skill, is knowing what's good and what should just be, when should you move on.
Yeah, the craziest thing about comp flying has been basically every time I've made a wrong decision, I've had this horror moment where I've just been down somewhere low, scratching around, trying to get back up to speed, and then watching the whole field just fly over me 65 kilometers per hour. It's a horror story just unfolding in front of you. But it's such a roller coaster of emotions. Acro flying is something I love and I'm going to love forever. It's very intense. It's very rewarding. It's very much instant pleasure. But the roller coaster of emotions throughout the whole day that unfolds within a cross-country comp and participating in an event like this is unbelievable. Because you can have your heart sink to the bottom of the ocean while you're 50 meters off the deck just scratching in some windy place, and then again you're on top of the gaggle on a big thermal with all these world-class pilots speeding away and being the one who's breaking away, which did happen to me once in the comp, and it's such a feeling of exhilaration. It's amazing.
What are your goals, Alex? You've had this kind of pretty nice mix of various different aspects of flying, proximity flying, acro, now, more recently cross country. Sounds like a little bit of exploration flying with Yasin in the last 12 years. What do the next couple and 5 look like to you?
I'm going to say the next couple of years look quite a bit like pursuing cross-country competition, as well as keeping my current acro level and always expanding upon it. Is probably going to get into some exploration flying as well. It's something I'm extremely keen on. And in the next 5 years, I'd like to start participating in some hike and fly races. This is probably going to be one of the toughest challenges for me because it's the first time in my life that I'm a physically active person, and I really want to get up to speed and up to shape in order to participate in these kind of competitions, but I have to do it in such a way that I don't injure myself from overuse, because it's a type of injury I've already had from so much flying. Flying is terrible for your shoulders, just to give an example.
Acro flying is terrible for your shoulders. Yes, indeed. It's
acro flying and landing 300 tandems a season is also not very good for your shoulders.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about that. Yeah. Tell me about tandems. This is something I've always very consciously avoided my whole flying career, because I hear from, it depends on who you talk to. You talk to some tandem pilots like Seb Espina, who just loves it, and he thinks it really helps his flying, and he just, it's good money, but it's also just, he really likes that aspect, sharing flying. But you talk to a lot of tandem pilots and they'll say, the one thing you want to do if you want to become a good pilot is not do tandems. How do you feel about that?
I've been doing tandems for the past 6 years. I'm going to say one thing about tandem flying. It's wonderful to share the joy of flying with somebody who has no responsibility whatsoever with the sport. In the sense that they're just out there to have those 15 minutes of amazing fun, and you're showing them this brand new perspective on life. And when we learn to fly, our first few flights are like being a tandem passenger. It's all new, it's all beautiful. This new sensation of flight is something undescribable, and it's being presented to you. And this awe and this admiration slowly fades, and it gets peaked up again every time you discover a new acro maneuver, every time you fly a new place. But with time, it kind of wears off. And with tandem flying, I feel you kind of absorb this from the person in front of you. Every time you do a tandem and you make somebody intensely happy, you kind of absorb this newfound awareness for flying again. So I greatly enjoy it. It's just a reason to be in the air many hours of the year. It does allow me to be very flexible with my time. It's a good motivation to be an extremely safe pilot. There is no making mistakes in tandem flying. Nobody cares if you land on your ass. Nobody cares what kind of tricks you fly in the sky. For tandem flying, you have to start perfectly every single time, no matter what conditions, and make sure that the person in front of you feels the confidence to entrust their safety to you. There's no making mistakes, and there's no taking dumb decisions.
Yeah, I imagine that's really an aspect of our sport where this, being mindful of complacency is a big one. I'm sure when you're just doing laps, and just doing slatters and kind of quote unquote the same thing over and over again, even though even flying tandems is never, no flight's ever the same as another flight. But I imagine that's something you have to remind yourself of pretty consistently. Is it, or is it just that's just natural?
No, it is. It is 100% true. We tend to become complacent pretty quickly with repetition. Is something I notice. And every time I notice a mistake in my routine when tandem flying, I have a very, very structured routine that goes from the moment I lay down my backpack on the ground to the moment that I push some passenger off a mountain. And every time I notice a mistake that I've made in this routine, I try to be pretty hard on myself because this could interfere with somebody's safety and mine as well. I'm not interested in injuring anybody, and I'm least interested in injuring myself.
How many people would you guess? 100. Okay, you take 100 people for a tandem. How many of those 100 decide I want to do this? I want to become a pilot.
I would say it's not very many. Um,
Is
just the
it
pursuit
one?
of play of 1%. I honestly don't know. I could say a number, but it would be pretending that I know.
But it's
It's
not
just the
big.
pursuit of flying it's not big. No, I would say the pursuit of flying is such a technical thing, and it's such a commitment in time, money, and dedication and mental bandwidth. Most people that I fly with, at least in the place that I do fly with, because it is a touristic place, it is a family holiday site. They're just there for a joyride.
Yeah, I'm fascinated by this. Why, you know, you're quite interesting. I don't know that there's that many people that get into this sport that come from not a very sportive background, and I'm always fascinated with this with my own group of friends. My most of my friends, I mean, nearly all of them, who I do, pretty wild things with, whether that's snowmobiling, backcountry, or ski touring, or I'm kind of like you with mountain biking. I've kind of given it up. I've got hurt too many times. But these are people who are very competent in the outdoors. Have played in the outdoors their entire lives. They have no interest in flying. They love my stories and they like watching the films, and they're fascinated by it, but they're not even interested enough to go have a tandem. That's interesting. That it's it's one of these things that I think most of us have in us when we're a kid. We look at birds and want to fly, and I certainly wanted to fly, but I didn't get into flying until I was in my mid 30s. I didn't really know what it was before then. But we don't see it like you do in the Alps. Here in the States, it's just not everywhere like it is in the Alps. So it's pretty hidden. But yeah, the question is, why do you think it only reaches out to a very small percentage of people? Because when you take your passengers tandem, they don't know any of those things about gear and time, and they're just, oh, I'm flying. This is pretty neat. I want to get into this, but it doesn't seem like that's the case.
I would say flying is something that you're born with. This
Hmm.
desire to look up into the sky and want to be there. I think you're either born with it or you're not. You can certainly grow into it, but I feel like this is a dream that is like a gene. It's within you. You can either choose to exploit it or not. I was a pretty nerdy kid. Most of my childhood was spent reading and doing some kind of pursuit that was not really very related to sports. At some point, that became an obsession with airplanes. I was very much into building and flying radio control airplanes, and that led into paragliding. Because at some point, I realized that these airplanes I was building and the joy I had in flying them were not enough. And as soon as I saw people actually flying on their own, this spark and this dream was born within me to actually take part in that. And at the beginning, there was no ambition. There was absolutely no desire to do anything but just sit up in this chair in the sky and watch the world from above, from this very contemplative, meditative position. But that slowly became the pursuit that it's become now, that has been mixed with being a multi-sport mountain athlete, participating at a high level in competition, which is something that I never desired before until this year. It's been an interesting journey, and to observe myself from the outside is very rewarding as well. Flying has brought me everything I have in life, personal transformation, a very, very rewarding and varied lifestyle, friends, a job, traveling to, I think I've flown in about 13 different countries by now. So yeah, the pursuit of flying, I would say, it's either something that's deeply ingrained in you, or it's something that you can appreciate and participate in as a passenger, but you're not going to be pulled into it because you think it's too extreme or too complicated, or you're just not drawn in that way to experiencing it constantly.
With your acro background, what would you say about the importance of SIV and XC?
I would say cross-country pilots have a bit of a way to go. I observed a few incidents in the air in Colombia. I saw some very interesting, to say the least, situations, including like a full one rotation tumble over an Enzo after an asymmetric collapse. Very, very enlightening to see from a distance. But it just shows me, yeah, but it just shows me the level of SIV that many top level cross country pilots have is insufficient. And I would say any amount of acro training and any amount of just control training, including ground handling and close to the ground flying and playing, is not just rewarding, but it's going to exponentially increase anybody's level of safety during this pursuit of cross country flying. Because to be honest, these cross country gliders, they can be extremely aggressive in very punctual situations, but an acro glider is more demanding when it gets out of control, I would say. Things happen quicker, and the fact that you become proactive in controlling an acro glider throughout maneuvers and throughout the learning process of acro gives you a lot of mental bandwidth to be able to play with when you are in an emergency situation, because there's a lot of things that your hands are doing without you ever having any idea what they're up to.
What would you like to see more of in our sport, Alex? When you're in a major hub, but what do you think is missing, or whether that be training, safety, instruction, wings, gear?
I would like to see training follow a more natural path, because a student fresh out of flying school has a very confusing career ahead of him. I would like to see training. I would like to see training follow a path that leads them, depending on their interest, through a safe way of progression to attaining their goals. Because right now, you leave school as a beginner pilot, and you're basically out on your own. Like, you can decide to take a cross-country course, you can decide to enroll in a safety training, but these are all very, very specific things, and there's not too much string actually binding them together.
I'm amazed that this is something that comes up all the time, and it doesn't matter who I'm talking to or from where they are. I know there are places that training is better than other places, and I won't get specific on that. But and there are, of course, instructors who are better than other instructors, and that's just the case in any sport and anything we undertake. But this bird out of the nest thing, getting kicked out of the nest is incredible in our sport. It's something that comes up over and over and over again. Depending on you can go through the APPI system or one of the others, but at some point you're quote unquote done with your initial training, and then see you later. Good luck. it's a bit mind boggling. It's no wonder that I think we have the attrition rate that we do, and also the accident rate that we do.
Yeah, the issue is that our sport is so unfathomably complex and far-reaching that it's hard to actually create a system of education that will encompass everybody's interest, I would say. Yeah, you get kicked out of the nest with a very, very basic set of skills that is very certainly insufficient for most situations in flying, except taking off in perfect conditions, flying down in perfect conditions, doing a little bit of thermaling in perfect conditions, and landing in perfect conditions. But the issue has to do with the fact that this is also not any conventional sport. This is, after all, aviation. This is, after all, extremely technical and extremely reaction-driven. And it's just a sport that requires such a massive investment of time and mental power, and I would say self-reflection as well, if someone wants to do it sustainably, that many people just find themselves incapable of dedicating that much energy into the sport and are stuck in this intermediate syndrome.
Yeah, for sure. Alex, curious, what's your biggest aha moment, let's say in the last year with paragliding?
Moving from an 18 acroglider to a 2-liner that I've never flown before in real air, and actually figuring out that paragliders can fly pretty far.
That's a fun one. Hey, wait a minute. I can go a long ways. This is cool.
Hey, wait a minute. I don't actually have to look down. I can look straight and I can actually go there.
Yeah, that is pretty neat. I remember the first time I watched the X Alps was in 2007, and I was sailing. We were doing the kite surfing expedition thing, and I was sailing up in. Oh, do I have that right? No, that was 2011 when I was sailing in Scotland. But anyway, I saw the first one in 2007, and it blew my mind. All I had ever seen was exactly what you described, was people would launch off a hill and fly around for a little bit and then land right there where you were standing. And that's what I thought paragliding was. It just seemed the most boring thing in the world to me. And then I saw somebody put me onto the X Alps, and I watched it and just got totally addicted. And I thought, wait a minute, hold on a second here. These people are traveling. they're using this, like you said, what did you call it? A bag, flying bags to travel.
Yeah. For me, it's still completely unfathomable to put my head around the fact that we can ski tour or trail run or hike up a mountain with basically a school backpack, and then proceed to go 300 kilometers in the Alps. To me, it's just a crazy pursuit. Is the fact that we are the first. Humanity has always had their eyes turned up to the sky, always thought, wow, it would be so majestic to soar among the birds. The fact that we live within the first few generations that are able to do this with such ease and convenience, it seems to me a waste of my time not to dedicate myself to that.
Yeah, it seems quite unfair, doesn't it, that we didn't have plastic and nylon when Da Vinci was alive. That poor guy. He dreamt all this. He drew it all out, but he couldn't do it. No, we're very fortunate. What's the funniest thing you've ever seen flying?
Oh, that's a bit of a difficult one. I'm gonna have to think about that one for a bit. I've seen many interesting situations. I think I was living at a flying site called Bischling, Werfenweng.
I know Bischling.
So, okay, cool. Nice. I was living there last winter, and one thing we would do is just, Austria is a very alcoholic country, let's put it that way. And one thing we would just do is there's like a mountain hut right next to the takeoff. We would sit on the terrace and have some beers and just eat some imaginary popcorn and watch things going on at the takeoff, with all kinds of pilots and all level of pilots taking off and flying around. it's a circus.
Yeah, it is. That can be quite circusy, isn't it? At a busy launch, it is very entertaining. And yeah, Michelin would be a good spot for that. We constantly go through there day one of the XL. So, what piece of kit would you love to see that doesn't exist yet?
I was gonna wish for it, but somebody just brought it out on the market, and it's this new flare glider that allows you to have deep power like a kite and fly closer to the ground. I'm so stoked to try one of them soon. That's a big dream of mine, to have this ability to swoop down and stick to the ground. And something I'd really like to see is a bit of an innovation in the rescue technology in cross-country harnesses. I'm thinking a base system in a cross-country harness would not be a bad thing. I'm really surprised nobody's brought it out on the market, because cross-country pilots need weight anyways. Weight is not an issue. I myself fly with 6 liters of water in my cross-country harness. I'm thinking that those 6 liters of water could be a life-saving base system instead of just useless water.
Do you know about Vesso's harness? He's made it.
Of course, he's has he a cross-country one already?
No. Oh, sorry. I didn't hear you say cross country. Yeah, no, it's acro, but no, his harness is terrific with that whole base system and cutaway system. But yeah, if we could bring that in, I think it's coming. But if we could bring that into XC, that would be really terrific.
Probably another piece of kit I would be very, very much interested in would be a more beginner-friendly school harness, just to avoid all the kinds of mistakes that still happen somehow with people not even experienced pilots. This is something that's completely confusing to me, how pilots can still forget to do the leg straps. And the current T-bar systems and the current stay up or not forget systems out there on the market, they're nice solutions, but they're fiddly, and I wish there would be some kind of a system that would make this completely impossible. The fact that you could get into a pod harness or into a school harness with your legs undone and thereby producing a deadly incident.
Yeah, that's a good one. It still happens way too much. That always blows me away too. But yeah, we've got to. It'd be nice if we can get rid. This is something that doesn't happen in commercial aviation, because they've made checklists. They've made you can't. They've eliminated the dumb stuff, because you have to go through this every single time, and we teach that to an extent. And it becomes a thing. The checks you do. That's the something we've ingrained in people, but it still gets forgotten. We're still human. We make mistakes.
The one thing that flying so many tandems, so many thousands of tandems by now, has really ingrained into me is the importance of a standardized procedure.
Yeah.
So I follow basically the same procedure from the moment I set down my backpack on the ground to the moment that I leave the ground. And this applies across the harnesses that I use. So for me, it's very simple. It's one leg strap, T-bar on one side, T-bar on the other side, the other leg strap, chest strap, or whatever combination of buckles that I have. But I try to do it consistently in exactly the same order. For once, it's just easier on the mind, and there's no way of making a mistake if you're always following exactly the same procedure.
Yeah, that's really smart. I think that's something that easily missed. We talk about all the time. When you're clipping in, don't talk to anybody and all these things. But if you just make it exactly the same every time, that's a good way to solve that. This is how you do it.
You never forget how to tie your shoes, because you've tied your shoes in exactly the same way your whole life. If you put on your harness exactly the same way your whole life, it's pretty hard that you're going to do something wrong.
Alex, you probably are aware of this, but I've been asking you questions from this survey I put out about a year and a half ago, and I've got a couple more, and then we'll wrap it up and be mindful of your time here. But I've really enjoyed this. I got a couple more here. This is a tricky one, but does free flight make other aspects of your life better or worse? So work, relationships, that kind of thing.
I would say free flight has been the single most determining factor in most of my life, in most aspects of my life, so to say. It's for sure determined where I live. It's for sure determined my friendships, my relationships, how I spend my time, how I plan my year. I would say it's been positive. As I said, free flight has brought me friendships, connections, work, an extremely rewarding lifestyle. A bit of an uncertain one at that, but extremely rewarding, I would say. It's brought me to actually love sports and love taking care of myself and being healthy. And it's just brought me to meet some of the most amazing people on the planet. You know, the diversity of people that are attracted to free flying. There's everything. There's absolutely everything. There's the IT guys, there's the engineers, there's the hippies, there's the crazy skiers. There's every type of colorful character you can imagine out there in paragliding. And for some reason, a big number of them tend to concentrate around this place called Camp Candy. If anybody wants a dose of color in their lives, I would really suggest spending a couple weeks down there.
That's a terrific spot. You've mentioned a few times that your approach has been pretty conservative, and you haven't had an accident. Been at this for a while now, 12 years. I'd like to just hear more about how you manage the kind of risk to reward spectrum and how you view luck versus probability.
I would say I can discount the first years of my flying as being not very risky. For sure, the flying that I'm doing, starting from the moment that I moved to Europe, is of much higher risk because it's much more real. One thing is coastal soaring and playing around on the coast, and it's completely another thing to be living in Stubaital, where you can choose to take off on a day with firm probability and then see yourself flying 30 kilometers per hour backwards if the wind actually blows in through the valley. So I would say my risk level has increased, but it has increased very much proportional to my expertise and my knowledge. I would say it's very, very important for people wanting to do this for a long time to take a look at themselves from the outside. Consider what kind of risks they're taking, consider how to minimize these risks, consider the value of always staying up to date in training, and the importance of having proficient glider control. You know, I never want to be in a situation where I very much feel that I'm a passenger of destiny. And this, as an acro pilot, I say I'm a conservative acro pilot because I'm not very often out of control. There's many people flying acro who get into situations with multiple twists, and they get out of these situations successfully, and very often. One thing you see in acro flying is actually how dire a situation can be and still solve itself completely on its own. But I don't want to take this approach because I don't think it's a sustainable one. I'd rather take an approach where either I don't put myself in a situation where I'm out of control, or if I put myself in a situation that I'm out of control, I have the tools at my disposal to work myself out of it and not just wait for fate to do its thing.
It's important for us to not confuse luck with skill, isn't it?
Completely.
Alex, it was a very articulate hour with you. I love how you describe flight and your approach. Thank you very much. That was a true joy. I really appreciated this. I learned a lot, and thanks for your time.
Thanks, Gavin. As I said, the podcast for me is a wonderful medium to learn. It's something I plug into when I'm running or ski touring or just really need to clear my mind and bring some fresh thoughts. Some of the people that you give a platform to are amazing. And I just hope that my words can inspire some people to follow this, as I said, this dream of flying bags around with grace and tact all over the world. It's quite a colorful thing we do. It's beautiful.
That's a nice goal. To do this with grace and style and tact is important. Thanks, Alex. I appreciate it. And good luck. I hope to see you in the sky soon.
See you in the sky soon, Gavin. I don't think it's going to be very long until we meet at some comp.
That sounds like it. Sounds like it for sure. Cheers, bud. Thank you. If you find the Cloud-Based Mayhem valuable, you can support it in a lot of different ways. You can give us a rating on iTunes or Stitcher, or however you get your podcast. That goes a long ways and helps spread the word. You can blog about it on your own website or share it on social media. You can talk about it on the way up to launch with your pilot friends. I know a lot of interesting conversations have happened that way. And of course, you can support us financially. This show does take a lot of time, a lot of editing, a lot of storage and music and all kinds of behind the scenes cost. So if you can support us financially, all we've ever asked for is $1 a show. And you can do that through a one-time donation through PayPal, or you can set up a subscription service that charges you for each show that comes out. We put a new show out every 2 weeks. So for example, if you did $1 a show and every 2 weeks, it'd be about $25 a year. So way cheaper than a magazine subscription. And it makes all of this possible. I do not want to fund this show with advertising or sponsors. We get asked about that pretty frequently, but for a whole bunch of different reasons, which I've said many times on the show, I don't want to do that. I don't like having that stuff at the front of the show. And I also want you to know that these are authentic conversations with real people, and these are just our opinions, but our opinions are not being skewed by sponsors or advertising dollars. I think that's a pretty toxic business model. So I hope you dig that. You can support us. If you go to cloudbasedmayhem.com, you can find the places to support. You can do it through patreon.com/cloudbasedmayhem. If you want a recurring subscription, you can also do that directly through the website. We've tried to make it really easy, and that will give you access to all the bonus material, little video casts that we do and extra little nuggets that we find in conversations that don't make it into the main show, but we feel like you should hear. We don't put any of that behind a paywall. If you can't afford to support us, then just let me know and I'll set you up with an account. Of course, that'll be lifetime, and hopefully you're being in a position someday to be able to support us. But you'll find all that on the website. All of you who have supported us or even joined our newsletter or bought Cloud-Based Mayhem merchandise, t-shirts or hats or anything, you should be all set up. You should have an account and you should be able to access all that bonus material now. Thank you so much for listening. I really appreciate your support, and we'll see you on the next show. Thank you.